Welcome everyone to New York SPIN for our May meeting. I'm Bill Greenbaum. I'm Marketing Chair, Secretary, and Treasurer, New York SPIN. This is the final meeting for our 2014-2015 season. We want to thank our sponsors for this year. Foremost, our venue sponsor who's hosting us tonight is Thoughtworks. Thanks to our other sponsors, O'Reilly Publishers, the Internet Society, Pearson Publishers, Auerbach Publications, and Pragmatic Bookshelf. Finally, the last sponsor is Cooper Presents. If there was a theme for tonight, for how tonight happened, I'd say it is one door closes and another door opens. By the way, does anyone know who actually wrote that first? Helen Keller wrote that in one of her books. One door closes, another opens. There was supposed to be a presentation in September of the season, and that speaker couldn't make it. That was Ram Srinivasan. He was a terrific speaker the previous season for a presentation about productive meetings. So we asked him, could he suggest some other speakers who are also really good? And William Baxter was on the very top of his list. So we've been trying that long to find William Baxter's time in his schedule, and he's been trying that long to make time in his schedule to do this. And we're very, very excited that he's here. We don't often get a PhD from UC Berkeley who also happens to love cooking, who happens to also be an expert in helping organizations large and small develop new approaches to being more productive and doing great work. And that's who William Baxter is. It's someone who really rolls up its sleeves and really wants to contribute and help other people succeed. That's William Baxter. So he'll be speaking till about 7:20. This includes time for questions and answers. And without any further ado, William Baxter.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for the kind introduction. The topic tonight is economics in agile and lean practice, and I have to ask at the outset, what brought you here? Because I don't think it was that title. So what's your angle on this? Maybe you can tell me who here works in some kind of developer role, if anybody. How about project management role? Or a product management role? An executive role at a company, maybe. What do the rest of you do? I didn't see a few people respond.
Systems analyst.
Systems analyst? Okay. And you're in software testing?
Team lead of technical communications.
Team lead of technical communications? And
I guess you'd say executive role. I'm CTO.
CTO, okay. I ask because I'm going to try to get you to share with us some of the problems that you find in your day-to-day. The goal here is to focus on a small number of tools that you can borrow from economics thinking and apply in the agile and lean context. So just a little bit of background in addition to what Bill gave you on myself. I'm a longtime entrepreneur, and my first company I started when I was in high school. It was a skateboard shop. Didn't really go anywhere, but it taught me a lot about how business doesn't work, and that was useful to know. And then I pursued an advanced mathematics degree, and there comes a time when you do that, when you look around the room and realize that you're among the other 10 people in the universe who know or care what you're talking about, and how special is that? And one answer is that's very special, and I could be an academician. And another answer is I got to find something else to do with my life. So that's the road I took. I then went into software engineering and spent a lot of time. I started another company with a friend of mine. This was in Oakland, California, and we did work in high-end technical publishing for a while, and then I segued into more online services, Unix services, as the internet came into vogue, and came to New York to work at a startup here, ended up running technology groups, and became very frustrated with the dysfunctional relationship that I kept encountering over and over between people on the business side or on the product development side, and stakeholders and people in technology. It was typically a client-vendor relationship inside the company that really impeded our ability to get things done. And I banged my head against that so many times that I decided I have to understand better what leads people to do this and how they can do something different. And that's when I began my journey into Agile and Lean development, and ultimately applied that to the teams that I led, and finally went into consulting and branched out into more enterprise consulting in that realm. So I've done a lot of work in the last several years in rolling out teams and helping them to change the way that they approach product development. And along the way, I kind of had in the back of my mind one of the hobbies that I have, which is reading economics. I'm kind of I'm self-taught in economics, but I have very strong tastes in economics. And that kind of dovetails nicely with the stuff that I've done with these companies. And what I realized is that there's actually a very interesting connection between the two, and that's really the basis for my presentation today. So I'd like to make clear what we're talking about in terms of product development. There are various groups in any company. Some do maintenance of things, some do customer service, some do DevOps, and some do product development. And I'm going to focus tonight on product development. So how many of you would characterize your role as related to product development? So that's about half the people. And what I have in mind when I say this is development of things that can be deployed to customers so that they can interact with them. Those could be internal customers, those could be external customers. What I'm not talking about is things like operational support. So internal DevOps support, say, or customer service requests. You can apply this sort of reasoning to that, and that's a very interesting topic, but I'm not going to focus on that today. So just wanted to frame that. So we're talking about developing products for or features for customers, and maintenance could be included, but again, it's about the features. It's not about the every request must be satisfied type of operational support. Okay. So any questions about that distinction? If you're interested in that, we can talk about it afterwards. I would argue that that distinction is actually a little more apparent than real, but I don't want to get into that in the middle of the talk. We can talk about it later. So most of you are involved in product development of one sort or another. So what are the pain points that you encounter in your product development? Give me some examples.
Well, more prior than currently in an agile environment, I used to be waterfall for most of my career, was accurate requirements.
Accurate requirements. Okay, so there's a pain point.
Never-ending review cycles.
Never-ending review cycles. Okay, there's a pain point. What else?
Not enough time to test the application.
What's that?
Not enough time to test the application.
Not enough time to test the application. So everything flows downhill and just piles up in QA, and then we'll make it up in QA. Okay, the schedule has slipped upstream, but what else?
Changing requirements.
Changing requirements. Okay, so not enough up front and then changing later. What else?
Teams that aren't cross-functional.
Teams that aren't cross-functional. Okay, siloed teams. Very common problem. What else?
Yeah, along with that is internal dependency management.
Internal dependency management. Okay, so how many of you do agile development? Raise your hands high, let's see. That's a little less than half. So how are the others among the audience doing more traditional project management? Yes? Raise your hand if you're doing that. Okay.
Is chaos traditional? I'm not sure.
There's a long tradition of that, I would say. Chaos. Okay. So I would say this audience then is kind of mixed in terms of its agile practice at present. Is that true of your knowledge of Agile as well? Do some of you who are not practicing Agile, do you know it, but you're just not practicing it now? Yeah? Okay. What about economics? Anybody here familiar with economics to any degree? A little bit?
Freshman college.
Law of demand makes sense, yeah. Broken window fallacy. Who knows broken window fallacy? You know. Okay, a couple of those. Good. So I'm going to assume that you more or less are familiar with Agile concepts, okay? And that really it's about mapping those into economics. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, modern economics dates back to Adam Smith. He published The Wealth of Nations in 1776. It's been fairly vigorously developed since that time. There are a lot of concepts that are pretty well developed in economics, and they're pretty clear in terms of their understanding. Agile and Lean in software development, by contrast, how old is that?
2001 was the Agile.
2001 was the Agile Manifesto. Lean goes back a little further on the manufacturing side, but it's more recent in its application to software development. There's a lot of overlap in concept, and that's what I'd like to chart out a little bit of tonight. So there's a lot more where this came from, but we'll focus on several things that I think are easy to apply practically. And I think that there's a big advantage in doing this because you can make use of all of that well-developed understanding from the economics world. Now, economics has something of a poor reputation in terms of being dry and being boring, and I'll give you a reference that will debunk all of that. There's a guy named Frédéric Bastiat who wrote a tremendous number of economic essays in the period of 1845 to 1850. He single-handedly debunked virtually every bogus economic argument that you hear commonly today. And he did it that long ago. And it's wonderful reading. You can find translations from the original French online. It's very easy read. And he's the one who wrote the original essay about the broken window fallacy.
What's his name again?
Frédéric Bastiat. I've included it on a references slide at the end. The essay is called "What is Seen and What is Unseen." And by unseen, he meant the unintended consequences. So that kind of opened up a whole new way of thinking in economic terms. But it's not actually as dry as people say. And what I'll try to do today is just show how you can use it, and making it practical, I think, will help frame it for you if you want to look into it further. So let me share with you three examples of pain points that I encounter a lot in my work with people doing product development. So I hear this a lot. We've got a big roadmap, we got to get through it, we just have to be more efficient in order to get through it. We're just working too slow. If we only could work faster, then life would be good, our backlog would drain, we'd get all this done, we'd be on easy street, okay? Anybody here encounter that or feel like that you just need to get more done? Okay. There's nothing wrong with efficiency, but I'm going to argue that there's no way to solve this problem with efficiency. Here's another similar argument. If we only had resources, we're resource constrained, right? If only we had the resources, then we could do it. And it doesn't matter which group you're part of. If you're part of QA, resources are constrained. If you're part of design or development, resources are constrained. Resource constraints are just a fact, and we all have to live with them. And finally, people get really frustrated, right? I don't know how many times you've walked into an enterprise that has this problem, but I've done it many, many times. And it's hard for people to admit that if they've submitted something 2 years ago and it's not done, then it's never going to be done because it's just not important enough. They think that it's a capacity issue, right? They think that if they were efficient, that backlog would drain. So what is efficiency? It's doing things in the minimum of time and effort, right? And everybody could use more efficiency. Every team can be more efficient. Do you guys, with your groups, actually try to experiment with changes that make your teams operate more effectively, more efficiently, rather? Streamlining process or something? What do you do?
I just think regular retrospectives.
Regular retrospectives, looking for ways to
Yeah.
squeeze out the waste?
Relatively young teams, so they're kind of new to the whole thing anyway, so there's a lot of movement
Mm-hmm.
within the process. And also each project is totally different.
Right.
I work for a consulting group, so every time the same team might have to encounter a different process for themselves to make it work.
Mm-hmm. You had something?
Constantly trying to improve processes, which is what we're all about.
Trying to constantly improve processes, yes. You know, a lot of times I walk into a client and they think that efficiency is the key to their success. Like I said, they think the backlog will drain, everything will get done, they won't be in this position of putting things in and having them languish in the backlog. Okay, the problem is that there's an imbalance between ideas and implementation capacity. Ideas are relatively cheap and easy and fast to produce, and implementation capacity is much more expensive and much more laborious and much more time consuming. And because of that imbalance, you will never solve, unless you can become so efficient that you implement as fast as you ideate, you will never solve the problem of a large and growing backlog with efficiency. It really is that simple. And so the first thing that I have to do typically on a client job is disabuse them of the notion that we're actually there to help them become more efficient. We are, but that's the minor part of our effort. The majority part of our effort is not about efficiency because ideas are cheaper, resources are limited, right? All the things that we just talked about. Implementations are always the bottleneck. Different ideas have different business value, so you can't just take them as they come. You have to make priority decisions. And time is limited. If you're in a competitive industry, and if you're not, please come speak to me after the program. You know that time is limited. You've got to get your stuff out there before your competitors do. So given that, the real problem is not one of efficiency, it's one of effectiveness. This is the term, anyway, that crops up in the Agile and Lean literature. This is about choosing the right things to do, right? Making those priority decisions, extracting the main value out of the backlog. You know, the main benefit that a backlog gives you is through things falling off the bottom. It's a filter. It's not because they're bad ideas, but because they're not good enough ideas, right? And so your effort gets focused on the best ideas. And that should be the standard use of a backlog, but that's a very rare event when I first show up at a client. So that's something we work with them a lot on. And this means that effectiveness always outweighs efficiency in terms of the impact on the company. So what we really need to focus on is how to be effective. Of course we're going to try to be more efficient. Of course we're going to try to put together cross-functional teams where you can make very rapid decisions inside the team. That makes them fast. That makes them efficient, rather than going out through some chain of stakeholders and coming back. So I've talked about Agile and Lean, but I haven't mentioned economics. How does this connect us to economics? Well, the most commonly used definition of economics is this one. Lionel Robbins, in 1932, he was the head of the London School of Economics. He came up with this definition. So it's really about human behavior, and it's about applying limited scarce means to alternative ends, right? And we've just been through that. We've just talked our way through that. Time is limited, resources are limited, team size, implementation capacity is limited, but you have all these ideas, all these alternatives that you can pursue. So here we are. We've basically just said in product development, we're exactly here. We're trying to make those good decisions. So we're actually we're making an economic decision. And because of that connection, all of the economic reasoning around this definition applies very directly to product development. So what I'd like to do is take 3 or 4 concepts, depends on how the timing works out, and just talk about the Agile concept, then map it into the economics concept, and finally show how that can play out in your day-to-day. Because this is not a theoretical exercise. This is supposed to be a practical exercise where you gain a new tool to apply every day. All right? So what do we do? Well, we're going to choose, so I just went through this, but we're going to choose a concept, we're going to identify the corresponding concept, and then we're going to apply it in practice. So the first concept is from the lean startup world, but it's very common in agile development these days. That's the minimum viable product, or MVP. So how many of you are familiar with MVP? Okay. How many of you use the concept in your work? Okay. So a minimum viable product, there are a couple of definitions floating around, but basically it's a limited functionality that allows you to test some hypothesis about the user. You want to know, can you engage the user this way or not? Will the users pay you for this or not? And this is related to a concept in economics called revealed preference. So anybody here familiar with the term revealed preference? It's pretty simple, actually. Okay, you are. So people in economics, in the economics literature, talk about 2 types of preference, stated and revealed. Let me ask you a question. I'll just take notes. What's your favorite type of car? Why don't you go first, Bill?
Oh, Tesla.
Tesla.
Absolutely.
What's your favorite kind of car? Let's go, rapid.
I don't drive.
Okay, so
No car.
none. All right.
Maxima.
Maxima.
Tesla.
Tesla.
A Metro card.
MetroCard.
Prius.
Prius.
Excalibur.
Tesla. Subaru.
Corvette.
Corvette.
Don't have it.
What's yours?
Jeep.
Cheap?
Jeep.
I thought you said cheap. I thought you were having me on there. What's yours?
68 Firebird.
68 Firebird, very
Right.
specific.
Subaru.
Subaru. We got another Subaru. Where is it? Corvair. VW.
Just to be different,
Checker.
checker.
That is different. Okay. I asked you a question. This is like giving an interview or doing a survey. This is stated preference. Okay, now let's turn this around. I think some of you kind of had an inkling where this is going. What car do you own?
I don't own a car.
What car do you own? You put in the none. What car do you own?
Maxima.
Maxima. What car do you own? None? What car do you own? None. What car do you own?
I do own a Prius.
Prius!
I have 5.
What's that?
I have 5 cars.
Is this one of them?
None of them are on the list.
Saturn.
Saturn. That's another other.
I have 3, one of which is a Subaru.
Okay, and you said Subaru, so.
The other 2 of which aren't up there.
Okay. None.
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 No.
None.
You're in New York.
Yeah.
Subaru, yes. That's why I chose this question. Accord. Okay, other. So, you see where we're going, right? Here is stated preference. And here is revealed preference. Revealed preference is the economics term for putting your money where your mouth is. You know, a lot of us love the Tesla in the abstract, but when we're faced with the actual decision of whether to spend our hard-earned cash on it, we prefer none. And sure, it's contextual. You know, I just moved from New York City to Austin, Texas. So I get to drive again and I get to own a car again, right? But there's a strong difference, okay? And revealed preference is what you want out of an MVP. So an MVP is actually a test to reveal preference, okay? Because you can ask people what they want, and they'll tell you all sorts of things. But how do they behave? We're talking about human behavior here. So how does that play out? How do we apply this practically in the context of product development? Well, I'll give you one example, very simple example. I worked with a team a few months back. They were building a phone app for rating phone carriers. And they created a paper prototype. And they ran around the building asking people, would you rate your carrier like this? Would you rate your carrier like this? Would you rate your carrier like this? And I took them to task for asking for stated preference, not revealed preference. Okay? And the next time out, they handed people the piece of paper. And they said, please rate your carrier. And then a lot of people said, I don't have time. You know, people who just the day before had said, oh yeah, I'd use that, and this is what I'd say, and that's what I'd do, and you know, then they said, oh well, you know, I've got other things to do. So the engagement was completely different. So what you want to do is move from asking them to observing them and observing how they actually behave when they are interacting with your product. And that's what an MVP is about. So it's the smallest piece of functionality that you can put out in front of somebody in order to get reveal preference. Okay? And that's the prize. And in economics, revealed preference is considered categorically more important than stated preference because it's putting your money where your mouth is, right? So when you work with MVPs and you see people using MVPs to obtain stated preference, that should raise a flag, right? That's not what it's about.
So, is there anything we can learn from the fact that Subaru is the only car that has the same revealed and stated preference?
I don't know.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, the question was, is there anything we can learn from Subaru being the only car that has the same on both sides? And my answer is, nothing comes to mind for me. I don't know.
No, so it wouldn't say anything specific about the fact that these people are putting their money where their mouth is and they're happy about it?
Maybe. I don't know. It depends on what you're trying to learn from the people.
Okay.
Yes, Bill.
I mean, what you said, what's interesting to me about it, it's true what you said, but it's such a small part of the total picture, and
Right.
it's it's not the one that had the most number of responses either. So it's just one of a number of things that came out that way. The none is really.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to appeal to the largest audience, maybe you're focused here. If you're trying to if you're trying to sell a car, or if you're looking for people who have the most correct self-assessment, maybe you're looking here. I don't know. It's not easy always to say. And that's part of the art of designing good MVPs. MVPs are hard to design. You have to be very strict about coming up with your hypothesis. What are we trying to test? What preference are we trying to reveal? And then constructing a test around that. And they come in all shapes and sizes because of that.
I think this exercise also shows the importance of asking the right question when surveying. Because if it was like, if you were to buy a car, which type would you buy, is a different question than what's your favorite car, which could be a dream thing.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And yet, even if you ask if you were to buy a car, that's different from somebody reaching in the wallet and pulling out the actual money and plonking it down for a car. Yes.
Well, you're leading into something where you actually try to get the requirements from a client.
Mm-hmm.
And one way, the first of the MVP way was saying, well, what would you like to have?
Right.
Rather than what do you actually need to do your work?
Right.
Really, it's a big difference.
It is a big difference, and MVPs come in all shapes and sizes. So some of them are really direct observation. So, for instance, the concierge MVP is a style of MVP. An example is a company called Food on the Table. This started in Austin some years ago. They were trying to figure out how to do recipes for people and package the groceries with them, and it was a subscription service. There are several companies like that now. They were pretty early in that space. And early on, they wanted to understand how people shopped. So they put up some flyers and with their number on it, and they said, we will shop with you. And they went to the store with people and just wandered around, talked to them. How do you shop? What do you look for? What order do you buy in? What brings you here? What brings you there? How many stores do you go to? And then they paid them back by delivering the groceries to their house, or helping them in some way. So that's more of an observation rather than a direct product interaction test.
Okay, so I have a question. So you're talking about the difference between stated preference and revealed preference.
Yes.
But the example you just gave, I don't understand how that's not still stated, because you're asking them a question, you're asking them to tell you something as opposed to just observing them shop.
They also just observed them shopping. They said, we'll follow you. Go. Just pretend we're not here. So it's, sometimes it's hard to draw the line clearly, sometimes it's easier. Has anybody here heard of the button to nowhere MVP or the 404 MVP? So the idea there is that if you have a small feature you want to add to a website, you add a button that says, hey, there's this great new feature, click here, and then that goes nowhere. Or maybe it goes to an error page that says, this feature is coming soon, give us your email to be on the early adopters list, and you'll be in the special club. And then you see whether they will pay with an email. And so there's a currency, there's a payment involved. It's not a monetary currency, it's paying with information. So that's another example. And there are many, many others. Tony Hsieh, when he started Zappos, did what's called a Wizard of Oz MVP. So he put up a website that purported to take shoe orders online, but it didn't do that. In fact, it just sent him an email. And he'd gone to the store, to the shoe stores nearby, and said, I'll take pictures of your shoes, I'll bring you the business when I get orders, but I'm going to put the pictures online, and I'll take orders online. So I'm not cannibalizing your business. And his question was, will people buy shoes online? And so when you ordered through his system, he got an email, he ran down to the corner, bought the shoes, shipped them to you, and then interacted with you that way. So he didn't have to build anything except a website. He didn't have to build any infrastructure or inventory or anything like that. And he discovered, yes, people will buy shoes online, but they need a really robust return policy. And that was a critical insight in developing Zappos. So That's the kind of thing you need MVP for. So it's a very powerful tool, and it's all based on revealing preference. Great questions. I love questions. Keep asking questions. Any more questions? All right.
What's next?
What's next? Great question. I love that question. So cost of delays. How many people are familiar with cost of delay? This one actually maps more directly than most concepts into economics. It kind of came the other way around. So cost of delay for a project or a product is the cost or the loss that you incur by delaying its implementation and deployment. And that's really a pretty direct map onto opportunity cost, which is the economics concept. The idea that choosing option A has a cost, and that cost is foregoing option B. Okay, so what you give up in choosing option A, say purchasing the Tesla, is living a life free of a car. Right? You have to garage it, you have to maintain it, you have to insure it, exactly. All those things that you're going to give up by having no car. So this comes up a lot of times. Is anybody familiar with the shortest job first approach to prioritization? This is a concept that's highlighted in SAFE. It doesn't originate there, but they borrowed it. The idea is that you rank jobs according to, you assign business value to jobs, and then you assign some kind of level of effort, and you divide the two. And that gives you a number, and that's a weighted business value for the jobs. And then you take the maximum of those to start with. So it's a way of prioritizing that's basically an attempt to reckon with cost of delay or opportunity cost. So where does this come up in practical everyday practice? The case that I encounter over and over again is in multitasking. Oops, I keep thinking it's on this side. In multitasking with projects. So quite often you encounter circumstances where you have a team working on 3 projects at once, right? So they're running in parallel. And they're all going to get done at some point. You could also run them one after another. And let's concede the commonly contended ground. Let's say that running them one after another actually takes a little longer than running all 3 in parallel. That's debatable, but beside the point. What's the difference in these cases? Well, yeah.
As soon as you deliver the first one, you start getting some return on it.
Right, and so there's opportunity cost that you pay by not delivering that first one early, right? And there's a little bit of opposite opportunity cost, negative opportunity cost, if you will, in the final delay. Although most likely by delivering A, you're going to change your plans for B and C. So you get a double loop learning impact as well. You change your goals as well as just how you get there. And I see this all the time. I imagine most of you do too, yes? And this is a very stubborn problem in most of the companies that we work with. And they simply do not see this opportunity cost. So yeah.
I mean, most organizations just won't work with dedicated teams. They just don't think about dedicated teams. I think, to me, that's why I see a lot of that. Maybe there's must be other things too.
Well, yes, I mean, this is the cleanest with a dedicated team, but even if your teams aren't dedicated, you can still, by narrowing your priority set, deliver value at an earlier point. The other thing that's here that is a little more, that's also an interesting thing is the reduced overhead. Here you're carrying 3 backlogs throughout. Here you're not. You're carrying 1 backlog at any given time. That's a lot less overhead, actually. And that typically means that you're going to be more efficient, so it may even pull this finish point in. It's a lot easier to be on a team when you only have that one thing to focus on. Yes?
I guess just in terms of practical application, so what is the scope, or let me say the other one, what is the order of magnitude of A, B, at some level, when you have 3 people working on something,
Mhm.
not to all sit around the same computer,
Right.
there has to be parallel pathways of work. That's what I mentioned earlier, the idea of having internal dependency management and churn around that. You attempt to do A, B, C at some level, but ultimately the top level happens in reality. Because 3 people are doing 3 things at one time.
So,
Unless it's 3 people doing
so I'm thinking here of a fairly large, of a project level. So A is a project, not just a task, but A is a full-blown project, B is a full-blown project, C is a full-blown project. And the typical scenario here is you have multiple stakeholders who disagree about priorities, and rather than actually sort out their priorities, they more or less push them down to the team. They say, okay, we're going to work on all of them. And then when the stakeholder behind project A gets really excited, he comes to the team and says, guys, I mean, this is really the most important one. You got to do me a solid and get this one done first. And then stakeholder B shows up the next day with the same story. And in the end, the team is prioritizing for those stakeholders. And that's terrible. They are perfectly positioned not to know how to prioritize those because they're down in the weeds actually getting things done. And the stakeholders who should have a more of an overarching view are not doing it. So again, it's about effectiveness. It's about making those decisions to defer one in favor of the other. It's really more of an effectiveness thing. And people want this because they want to be efficient. But the effectiveness is more important. Does that make sense?
So is there like a minimum order of magnitude at which this falls apart? In your opinion?
Well, typically when you set up a team, you don't want to dictate how they do things. And in particular, you don't want to see strict serialization of siloed operations within a team because then it looks like mini waterfall. So we're not talking about, say, this is design, this is coding, this is testing. We're talking about this is a product that you're going to release, this is another product you're going to release, this is a third product you're going to release. And the main point is that you only get a payoff when you deliver. All the rest of the time you're just accruing costs. So if you looked at the cost curve here, it would go up and then you'd start, well, the cost curve there would start to go down because you'd be recouping the costs. Here, you're building cost all the way to the end until you deliver all 3. And then you hope that, that what you learn from A doesn't completely change C because it's too late. Great questions. Who else has a question?
I think the great thing about this is it shows the possibility of applying lessons learned from A or B to C, and you really don't, like what you just said, you really don't get that in the first scenario at all. It's just
Right.
at the end, you say, oh, this is what I should have done, but you have no chance to apply it.
Right.
This is fantastic.
There's is everybody familiar with the double loop learning concept? So some of you are. Double loop learning. So single loop learning means altering your path to the goal. So here's your goal, and here are you. And you find that something is in the way. So you take a detour. But you're still aiming at the same goal. Oh, I'm wandering out of range here. I'm going to get back. Double loop learning means you encounter that obstacle and you learn something by getting around it, and that changes the goal itself. And that's what this sets up, because when you release A and you start to see how the customers interact with it, you almost always end up learning something that impacts your subsequent development. So going back to your question, I think, think of this as a customer-facing deployable unit. In some circumstances, this is small. This is an MVP, right? And maybe you have a set of MVPs. You might be testing them in parallel. You might be testing them individually. The question really is, can we capture this? That's one of the big questions. And then the other question is, if these are large, can we reduce the overhead of of carrying all those backlogs in parallel and serialize them. Excellent. More questions? No? Okay. So, concept number 3, core competency. So what is core competency?
What you're best at.
What you're best at. And what's the basis for comparison there?
I hadn't thought about that, but I mean, I guess thinking economically, what you're better at relative to other people.
Okay. So you're looking at the competitive landscape and saying, we do this thing better than all those other folks.
No, actually, as I think about it, no, I guess it's what I do better compared to the other things that I do.
So that's comparative advantage. We just got a perfect definition of comparative advantage. So I think most people think of core competency in the first way. That's my experience. They think of it as a competitive comparison. What do I do better than my competitors? But comparative advantage is a subtle and powerful concept in economics. It really means, just as this gentleman said, what do I do best among the things that I do? Okay? And in economics, this is part of the theory of trade and the benefits from trade. If two people each focus on what they do best out of the other things that they do, and they trade with each other for the other things, they end up better off than otherwise. And that's true under very general circumstances. It's true even if one of them is better at everything than the other, because they can focus on what they do best among their alternative uses of their own time. And that's something that comes into play when you make build, buy, or partner decision, right? This is a very common thing, but this is, partner and buy are two variations on the trade prospect. And so if you can trade for something, what should you trade for? You should trade for the things that you are less good at relative to the other applications of your own time. So this is something that I think I'm really happy to see this, because most people struggle with comparative advantage a lot. You can read a lot of professional economists who botch that one. If you want, after the talk, I'll give you all my opinions about professional economists. I have many of them. And then some of them get it right. How many people made a build, buy, or partner decision this week? Nobody? You did? What did you have to decide?
Just some equipment. Some gear.
Equipment? And what did you decide?
We're getting some more SD discs for my cameras at work.
So you made a buy decision?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, you're right, you have that one. To build, whether to build an internal time tracking app or use one externally.
And how does it relate to your core competency as a group?
We are an engineering group, so we should assume that our core competency is software development.
Okay. But there's software development and there's software development, right? There's app development, or there's big data processing, or there's database work, or there's, flashy interface on the web.
Yeah.
So how does it relate to your comparative advantage, would you say?
It is a product. It's a mobile application, or several mobile applications.
So it's in your wheelhouse?
It's in our wheelhouse.
There you go.
Also, we didn't think the other guys did it well.
Uh-huh. That's an occupational hazard, though.
It is. It really is.
You're never going to escape that one. If only they had done, there's so many programs out there that are almost usable. Who else has made such a decision recently? Surely more of you did. What did you decide?
On Friday in sprint planning, we had a discussion about whether our team should do something which is a technical team or the chief of staff office.
Uh-huh.
They haven't agreed to do it yet, but we have a meeting to discuss it with them, because we're developing
Interesting. So this also relates to the specialization question, right? I mean, part of what we're talking about here is how do we specialize? And that question occurs at all different levels. That can occur at the level of a company, or at the level of a team, or at the level of an individual, and those are separate cases. This may apply in all those cases, but you have to be careful to distinguish those. There's not one answer about where the sweet spot is in all those cases. It's very different. One of the things you talk about in Agile is having cross-functional teams where you don't necessarily use full specialization. You want to cross-train so that people have a better sort of team understanding of the work.
I was just going to bring up sometimes you don't want to pick the person who knows the best, but you said it already.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that may play out one way or another. Excellent. More questions? Well, we can do the fourth one. The fourth one is interesting. I talked to Bill about this when we last met before I found the time for this talk. So story points. So how many people here have been involved in a discussion about the impossibility of understanding story points? Are they hours? Are they costs? Are they, okay. It happens all the time. And people say, oh, this is just abstract nonsense. How come we can't equate it to hours or something that really means something? So I think actually this is nonsense, and I'm going to demonstrate this for you. So here's a story point. So what is this worth? What do you think?
At work, it's worth a Snickers bar.
What's that? It's worth a Snickers bar? Okay. What's it worth?
Whatever you believe it's worth.
What's that?
Whatever you believe it's worth.
Whatever you believe it's worth? Oh, I hope that you're right. I'd like this to be worth a lot.
Or sorry, that other people
Can I buy a house from you?
Is that
What is it worth?
$1.
It's worth $1. What does that mean?
Whatever a dollar will buy.
Whatever a dollar will buy. Interesting. What can a dollar buy?
It's like a mark on a ruler.
It's like a mark on a ruler.
It
Go
can
ahead.
be worth whatever someone is willing to pay for it.
It's worth whatever someone is willing to pay for it. And what do they pay for $1? What do people pay for dollars?
They work sometimes for $1.
They work sometimes for $1, so they're giving labor for $1. They're paying in labor.
They give goods.
They give goods. Okay. So does $1 always buy the same amount of something? Does it buy the same amount of something here and in Philadelphia?
No.
Does it buy the same amount of something every day?
No. After Katrina, people were paying emergency rates to get their homes renovated.
Okay, so there's a lot of context to the value of something like this. And it may vary over time, it may vary over space, it may vary from person to person, right? How much does it take to get this? How much does it take to earn this? That also varies, right? These are the two things that people complain about with story points. What are they worth, and what does it take to get them? Right, to achieve them. But here we are. We deal every single day with something that is every bit as abstract and in a very similar fashion. So story points are a kind of currency. It's not that hard to understand. You just have to allow yourself getting comfortable with the concept. So it's not quite the same as currency because currency is an intermediation between good to good transactions, right? I can't always trade Bill apples for oranges because he runs out of oranges before I run out of apples. But we can intermediate with the dollar.
I thought story points was to differentiate which is more valuable or more complex, to do than another thing, whatever it is, or product. One product is, this story pointed feature is more complex than this story point feature. That's why it has a high value. Takes longer to do.
Or perhaps different amount of effort.
Yeah, that's one.
Right. So typically you apply story points to items of work to establish proportionate sizing, right? Proportionate level of effort. But the frustration that I hear most comes from the idea that this should translate into either implementation duration or actual work time. Neither one of which is really useful or equivalent. You know, it's more approximate than that. So it's a little more abstract than that, like this is. Because you may be spending those story points, you may be implementing that story in a week where you have a couple of people on vacation or something like that. Your team is a little compromised, or somebody got sick, or circumstances change.
So what drove the Agile approach to use story points instead of these other measures, which we know are not perfect, but usable, we're more familiar with? So
Great question. So story points are an attempt to get estimates that are good enough for their immediate use. And their immediate use is in prioritization. So when you have a backlog, you need to prioritize it somehow. So what do you need in order to prioritize? What do you need to know about a project or a piece of work that you can deliver to production in order to prioritize it?
I guess I haven't tried this, but they also do points sometimes on value on the other side.
Right.
It would be nice to have value points versus complexity points.
Right. So you need some idea of value and you need some idea of cost, and then you can, or benefits and cost, and then you can do a cost benefit. You can weigh the costs and benefits, and weighted shortest job first is one attempt to then turn that into a ranking.
Well, I was going to ask something, but just to answer your question, I guess.
Okay.
Lots of confusing stuff. The question I had was, if you're talking about dollars as being something that it's what someone will pay for it, and that depends on the location and time of the place. Location the person's in, the time it's happening, spatial and temporal.
Mm-hmm.
Who is the person whose value derives the story points, right? Is it the business stakeholder or is it the developers? Because you would argue that the currency is being given value to the person who will give something.
It's got to be both. It's got to be, the
In the
complexity
current-
is based on the developers, how complex it is. The business owner's got to determine how valuable it is to him, her, or him.
Right, but the ones who determine the value, the story points, are the developers.
No.
It's
Story
gotta be
points
both.
aren't valuable.
No, it's a product owner's got a say in it.
Well, let's be clear about something. This is
But that's not valuable.
Product owner talks about the
Well,
value,
story points
not
are
the
estimated by
points.
the developer.
He's not gonna go by
QA has a say in
Right.
story points.
The whole team, so I would say the
Right,
team
it's the
estimates
team,
the story
exactly.
points, but the product owner doesn't give the story point number.
Well,
That
usually, a
would
lot of
be-
times they don't
So-
use value points. The product owner will just come in with the list in priority order based on value. And then you're putting story points against each of those, and then the product owner might say, well, I thought this was valuable, but if it's that many story points, maybe it goes down.
story points, as they're typically applied, relate to the cost of something, right? And story points are assigned to a work unit by the team, but that doesn't give them value. That doesn't give story points value. That just says this is roughly the proportion of work that goes into this work unit. You don't need to know whether this item, you don't need to know exactly how much work this item is compared to that in order to prioritize. Let's say they have the same business value, roughly speaking, but one of them is 10 times the other in terms of effort. That's an easy prioritization decision. That doesn't tell you anything about the exact level of effort required. Similarly, if there are similar levels of effort, but one of them has 10 times the business value, it's an easy decision. Okay? So you need proportionality, and story points are an attempt to let you do relative sizing. The developers in the team, they assign the number of points for a particular work item, but that's different from talking to a stakeholder and saying, how much is that item worth to you as a businessman? So there's an interplay. I would say this analogy breaks down because currency is a commodity that's traded freely, and that's not quite the same as story points. But I will say this, that there are organizations now that price their services in story points. You pay N dollars per story point, and they will put a team on the floor embedded in your organization, and they'll do estimates and they'll crank out story points at that price.
But every team had a different scale of story points. Every team was kind of like your Philly and New York example.
Right,
That's
and
a
so
really weird
and so
part
there
of the
has to
story.
be, in a case like that, there has to be some negotiated agreement on the cost, the run rate associated with story point production, right? But it's an interesting development. I've never participated in that, but I've seen it a couple of times now with clients, and it's an interesting phenomenon.
One thing I've seen is this constant trying to turn velocity, and then turn that around and say, well, if your velocity is this, then I can then it says that you need to do so many points, and that will give me an end date of this, and therefore I'm going to hold you to that.
Right.
Without,
So estimates
focus
now
back
become
on
promises
concrete.
and commitments.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
They're going to cast in concrete what velocity is, and story points. It's no longer a rough guarantee of relative complexity. It becomes an absolute measure of time.
Right, and that's a sort of misconception that I think a lot of stakeholders have, and it's one that you just have to work with them over time to get past, because if they want accurate estimate, that's oxymoronic, right? These are estimates. These are best guesses based on current knowledge, and that knowledge next week is different from today. So our estimates might be different next week than today, and it's really what stakeholders need to come to understand is what is the purpose of putting the estimates on it. And there are actually two. So in Agile practice, there are two purposes that are completely different. And usually the more important one is not understood. When you do something like planning poker to obtain estimates, the primary output of that is a common understanding among the team members of what the work entails. It's the conversation that takes place around the work in fleshing out the estimates. That's the most important result of those estimation sessions. The second most important output is that number of story points. And that's important precisely because it lets you prioritize. But the common understanding at the team level is far outweighs the story point estimate in terms of its importance. I just got an estimate. Okay, so if this is of interest to you and you think that this is kind of a cool way of reasoning about these things, then where would you look for more information? Well, I have some references here that you can look at, and I'll work with Bill to distribute these slides so that you all have access to it. Cafe Hayek is a very interesting, very sort of bursty, easy to read blog, and the quote of the day is worth the price of entry by itself. If you just go there once a day and read his quote of the day, it's fantastic. So I would highly recommend that. If you want an overall introduction to economics, Thomas Sowell is a wonderful contemporary economist. He's at the Hoover Institute at Stanford, and he's written a book that's now in the 5th edition. Frédéric Bastiat, I mentioned this earlier, What is Seen and What is Not Seen, really delightful satire. I mean, so many of his writings are heavily satirical. It's really fun to read. It's really delightful. The most famous example is probably the petition of the candle makers. He spoofed some candle makers guild's petition to pass a law that causes people to shutter their windows all the time because of unfair competition from the sun. So that's the general tenor of his writing. It's really great stuff. And you can find that and everything else, a lot of other stuff related to economics on EconLib. And Ronald Coase, I put in here just because he's my favorite economist, no other reason. And this is a book you can get on Amazon. It's a collection of his most famous essays. This is a guy who did work in the 30s and in the 60s that's yet to really be fully absorbed into the economics profession, and it's actually quite accessible. It's not a bad read at all. It's very simple and straightforward, and it's wonderfully profound. His thing was to take problems that people had already resolved and dig in a little deeper and realize that there was actually a different solution there than everybody thought. Economics applied to Agile and Lean. Reinertsen is probably the guy who's done the most work here. He's got a book, The Principles of Product Development Flow, which is a really interesting book, desperately in need of a translator from English to English, because it's almost impenetrable. It's full of interesting ideas. He's mostly from the process side, so he's primarily focused on process optimization and lean management thereof. And I would, if you can wade through it, I think it's well worth the read, but that's tough going. And the Lean Startup, how many people have already read the Lean Startup? Okay, well that's a good one. This one to me is a little surprising because I think Eric Ries has an undergraduate degree in economics, and yet he eschews the language entirely. And why, I don't know. I've never had a chance to ask him about it, but I think it's well worth a read. And finally, contact me. And I love talking to people about this stuff. I'd be happy to continue the conversation now and later. And again, you'll get all these in the slides from Bill. And that's it.
Actually from Richard, but.
Okay, from Richard. From somebody who can take care of that. All right, they'll be on the website. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you very much.